Senior Engineer 6427 pressed his four upper appendages against the crystalline control panel of the Axiom Perpetual, his scaled skin reflecting the pulsing red warning lights that filled the engine room. The ship's faster-than-light drive had been acting erratically for the past 26 standard minutes, and nothing in his 3 centuries of experience had prepared him for the cacophony of errors flooding his screens. "Run the Level 7 diagnostics again," he commanded the ship's quantum computer, his voice maintaining the perfectly measured tone expected of a Quintary engineer. The computer complied, its holographic display spinning into life above the drive core. The results made his inner eyelids flutter in distress. The Axiom Perpetual was the pride of the Galactic Council's fleet, a vessel so advanced that most species couldn't comprehend the principles behind its operation. Now it drifted through the void between stars, its FTL drive reducing itself to a glorified paperweight with each passing moment. 3,000 passengers from 17 different species occupied the upper decks, many of them high-ranking diplomats headed to the Centennial Council meeting. Zix 427's secondary heart began to flutter as he contemplated the political implications of their delay. The methane-breathing Halfons would be particularly upset. They had only 40 standard days of life support in their specialized quarters. "Engineer, the tertiary power coupling is showing signs of quantum destabilization," reported his assistant, a young Quintary named X189. She manipulated the holographic controls with practiced precision, her movements almost musical in their fluid grace. "The safety systems are registering 17,000 simultaneous errors, but the error codes keep changing." Zix 427 slithered to the main engineering console, his species' characteristic glide somewhat less dignified, as he rushed to examine the readings. "Impossible," he muttered, breaking his professional demeanor for a moment. "The quantum matrix is perfectly aligned, yet the power output is fluctuating beyond acceptable parameters. Initialize the emergency protocols." The engineering team sprang into action, their movements choreographed by centuries of training and rigorous protocols. Holographic displays filled the air around the drive core, each one showing different aspects of the malfunction. The ship's most advanced diagnostic tools, systems that could typically predict a failure before it occurred, seemed to be speaking in tongues. "Contact the Volksar technical support," Zix 427 ordered, using one of his lower appendages to adjust the power flow to the drive's cooling system. "Their species designed the original FTL theory. Perhaps they can make sense of these readings." Hours stretched into days as the galaxy's finest minds grappled with the problem. The Volksar experts sent increasingly complex diagnostic programs, each one more sophisticated than the last. The Halfon quantum theorists contributed their insights from their specialized chambers, their methane-based biology, giving them a unique perspective on energy states. Nothing worked. By the end of the first week, the ship's recreation deck had been converted into an auxiliary engineering bay. Holographic models of the drive system floated in the air like mechanical constellations, surrounded by some of the most advanced beings in the galaxy. They debated theory, ran simulations, and proposed solutions that would have seemed like magic to lesser species. Yet the drive continued its inexorable decline. "The Council is demanding answers," X189 informed her superior as they began their 4th week of troubleshooting. "The Halfon delegates are threatening to sue for endangerment, and the photosynthetic delegates are complaining about the reduced light levels we've implemented to save power." Zix 427 stared at the drive core through the transparent safety barrier. It should have been glowing with the blue-white fire of contained universal forces. Instead, it pulsed with a sickly yellow light that seemed to mock their every attempt at repair. "Perhaps," he said slowly, each word feeling like a personal failure, "it is time to consider alternative solutions." His upper right-hand tentacle twitched as he brought up the contact information for the human colony of New Armstrong. The very thought of requesting help from such a young species made his professional pride ache, but they were running out of options. Behind him, the drive core gave another sickly pulse, as if laughing at the sophistication that had failed to heal it. The emergency council chamber aboard the Axiom Perpetual hummed with tension and barely suppressed outrage. Holographic representatives from 12 of the most powerful species in the galaxy flickered around the central podium, their various expressions of disgust, concern, and resignation transcending their wildly different physiologies. "You cannot be serious," Ambassador Vextor of the Vulxar delegation buzzed through his translator, his crystalline form vibrating with indignation. "Suggesting we request assistance from humans." He pronounced the word as if it left a bad taste in his energy matrix. High Commissioner Tlexin, a towering mantis-like being whose species had achieved spaceflight when Earth was still cooling, raised 3 of her sensory appendages in agreement. They still use combustion engines on some of their vessels. Combustion, like simple animals playing with fire. Zix 427 stood before them, his scales now a dulled gray from 4 weeks of constant stress and minimal rest cycles. "Honorable Council members, I have reviewed the data from every known engineer corps in the galaxy. The mechanic monks of Ta City have failed us. The quantum theorists of the Halfon worlds are baffled. Even the living ships of the Zex Collective cannot interface with our drive to diagnose the problem." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "But there are reports, stories from the outer colonies. The humans have a remarkable track record with," he searched for a diplomatic way to say it, "unconventional solutions." "You mean crude fixes and barbaric workarounds," interrupted Council Member Pexton, their gaseous form swirling with agitation inside their containment field. "Need I remind the Council that these are the same beings who once repaired a space station module using something called duct tape?" An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the chamber. Every species present had heard the stories, tales of human engineers performing what their kind called miracle fixes, using primitive tools and materials that belonged in a museum. The very thought of such methods being applied to the Axiom Perpetual's sophisticated systems was nearly sacrilegious. "The Halfon delegates have 36 days of life support remaining," Zix 427 reminded them quietly. "The photosynthetic species are showing signs of nutrient deficiency despite our best efforts to maintain their light requirements. We are running out of both time and options." The chamber fell silent. A holographic display materialized in the center of the room, showing the nearest human settlement, the colony of New Armstrong. Known throughout the sector for its spacecraft repair facilities, it had a reputation for solving problems that more advanced civilizations deemed impossible. "I have already identified a potential candidate," Zix 427 continued, bringing up another display. "A human engineer named Jack Thompson. His record shows an unusual aptitude for diagnosing and repairing advanced technology, despite using traditional human methods." The display showed images of Thompson at work, scenes that made several council members recoil in horror. In one, he was actually touching a plasma manifold with his bare hands, protected only by what the humans called work gloves. In another, he appeared to be hitting a quantum field generator with a metallic tool. "This is who you want to trust with the most advanced ship in the galaxy." Ambassador Vextor's crystal structure was now vibrating at a frequency that threatened to shatter lesser materials. "No," Zix 427 replied firmly. "This is who I want to trust with the lives of 3,000 people." The chamber erupted in debate, but the decision was already made. The mathematics of survival rarely cared about cultural sensibilities. Within hours, a message was dispatched to New Armstrong, marked with the highest priority tags the Council could assign. The response came back almost immediately, its casual tone causing several junior protocol officers to faint. "Sure thing, folks. Jack here. Just let me grab my tools and a fresh cup of coffee. Be there in 2 shakes of a dog's tail." As the message was translated and retranslated by increasingly confused xenolinguists, Zix 427 found himself wondering if he'd just saved the ship or doomed it. Either way, he had a feeling the next few days would be unlike anything in his 3 centuries of engineering experience. Jack Thompson's ship, the Lucky Spanner, docked with the Axiom Perpetual in what the welcoming committee could only describe as an unnecessarily dramatic fashion. The battered repair vessel looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, which, as they would later learn, it largely had been. "Hot Dan, would you look at the size of this beauty?" Jack whistled as he stepped through the airlock, a grease-stained duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a steaming container of what he called gas station coffee in his free hand. His work boots left visible marks on the pristine floor, making several maintenance drones short-circuit in distress. Zix 427 slithered forward to greet him, maintaining his professional composure despite the human's casual demeanor. "Engineer Thompson, welcome aboard the Axiom Perpetual. If you'll follow me to the briefing room, we have prepared an extensive technical overview off." Yeah. Paperwork later," Jack interrupted, already walking in the opposite direction. "I can hear your drive core from here. She's not happy at all." He paused, cocking his head to one side. "When was the last time you guys checked the harmonic resonance in the secondary coolant loop?" The alien engineer's scales shifted to a pale blue of confusion. "The quantum diagnostics show all cooling systems are operating within normal parameters. Diagnostics don't mean squat if you can't feel the ship's heart beating," Jack said, following his ears down a corridor. Somehow, despite never having been on an Axiom-class vessel before, he was taking the most direct route to engineering. "And right now, your lady's got one hell of an arrhythmia." The engineering crew watched in horror as the human walked straight into their sacred domain, breaking at least 15 safety protocols just by being there without a proper briefing. Jack set his coffee down on a quantum harmonic regulator. Several technicians fainted, and pressed his ear against the drive housing. "Thompson, I must insist," Zix 427 began, but Jack held up a hand for silence. "There's your problem right there," he said after a moment, pointing to a section of the drive that countless alien scanners had declared perfect. "She's singing in the wrong key. Mind if I pop this panel off?" Before anyone could stop him, Jack had pulled a well-worn multi-tool from his belt and removed an access panel that was supposed to be quantum-locked. The sight of him using manual tools on their precious technology caused several more engineers to require medical attention. "Well, would you look at that?" he muttered, head and shoulders deep in the drive housing. His voice echoed strangely through the complex machinery. "You've got a classic case of resonance cascade building up in here. These power conduits are so clean, they're actually causing friction at the quantum level. When was the last time you introduced some controlled chaos into the system?" X-189, who had been recording everything for the technical archives, asked. "Controlled chaos? Yeah, you know, the little randomness to keep things flowing smooth," Jack replied, his voice muffled as he reached deeper into the machine. "These new systems, they're too perfect. Sometimes you need a bit of good old-fashioned imperfection to make things work right. Hand me that coffee, would you?" The entire engineering crew watched in mute horror as Jack Thompson, human engineer, proceeded to pour a small amount of his coffee into a secondary power coupling. The horror turned to amazement as the sickly yellow pulse of the drive core immediately shifted toward a healthier blue. "There she goes," Jack said with satisfaction, patting the drive housing like an old friend. "Sometimes all these fancy systems need is a little touch of human randomness. The coffee's not for the machine. By the way, that was just to make you guys squirm. But the look on your faces, priceless. He turned to the stunned alien engineers, wiping his hands on his already stained coveralls. Now, who's ready to really fix this thing? And does anyone have a hammer I can borrow? A big one, preferably. The sound of multiple aliens fainting echoed through engineering. But ZX-427 noticed something extraordinary. For the first time in 4 weeks, the drive's warning lights had stopped flashing. The main engineering bay of the Axiom Perpetual had been transformed into what Jack Thompson cheerfully called a proper workshop. His tools lay scattered across surfaces, meant for holographic interfaces, each one looking more primitive and terrifying than the last. The centerpiece was something he'd introduced as Plan B, a massive rubber mallet that made the alien engineers wince every time he reached for it. "Now listen up, folks," Jack said, standing before the assembled team of Galaxy's finest engineers. Behind him, a holographic display showed complex quantum calculations that he'd been completely ignoring. "Your problem isn't in these fancy numbers. It's in the heartbeat of the ship." ZX-427 managed to keep his professional composure, though his scales had taken on a distinctly worried hue. "We have run every known diagnostic protocol. And that's half your problem right there," Jack interrupted, pulling out what looked like an ancient analog multimeter. "You're so busy looking at the numbers, you've forgotten to listen to the machine. Here, watch this." He pressed the device against the drive housing, then held up a hand for silence. The assembled aliens watched in mixed horror and fascination as he closed his eyes and started humming, matching the drive's resonance frequency. "There's your issue," he said after a moment. "She's running too perfect. These new FTL drives, they need a little wiggle room. You've got the tolerances set so tight, the quantum field can't breathe." "Quantum fields don't require respiration," one of the Volxer theorists objected. "Figure of speech," Jack grinned, already rummaging through his toolkit. "But the principle's the same. Sometimes you need to loosen things up a bit. Now, who here knows how to bypass the safety protocols?" The question caused immediate uproar. X-189's data pad clattered to the floor. 3 junior engineers had to be escorted out. The ship's AI began reciting safety regulations in 17 different languages. "Relax, relax." Jack held up his hands. "I'm not gonna break your fancy ship. I just need to see how she runs without all these governors in place. It's like taking the governor off a motor to see where the sweet spot is." He pulled out another tool, this one looking suspiciously like it had been made from parts of a toaster. "This here's what we call a Kentucky calibrator. Don't ask why. Long story involving my granddad and a horse. But it'll let us see the raw power flow without all your fancy filters getting in the way." The next hour was a masterclass in what Jack called seat-of-your-pants engineering. He connected his primitive tools to the most advanced drive system in known space, humming old Earth songs and occasionally giving the machine what he called encouraging taps with his various tools. "See, here's the thing about machines," he explained while simultaneously doing something that made the quantum theorists cover their eyes. "They're like people. Sometimes they get too wrapped up in being perfect, they forget how to just be themselves. Your drive here, she's got stage fright. Too many people telling her how to dance. She's forgotten her natural rhythm." To demonstrate his point, he released a series of carefully calculated imperfections into the drive's control systems. The horror on the aliens' faces turned to amazement as the drive's erratic fluctuations began to stabilize. "But the quantum harmonics," one of the theorists began, "are working just fine," Jack finished, pointing to his multimeter. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Now, who wants to learn how to really listen to a ship?" To everyone's surprise, ZX-427 slithered forward first. "I would like to learn," he said, his professional dignity warring with genuine curiosity. "That's the spirit." Jack beamed, handing him the multimeter. "First lesson. Close your eyes and feel the vibration. A happy ship has a rhythm all its own. And this lady, she's just about ready to show us her dance steps." As the senior engineer pressed the ancient device against the drive housing, something changed in the room. The constant warning lights, which had become background noise over the past month, began to dim one by one. For the first time in weeks, the Axiom Perpetual's heart started to beat in perfect time. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack said, his voice echoing from deep within the drive's service channel. He'd somehow managed to squeeze himself into a space that the ship's designers had intended only for maintenance drones, his boots sticking out at an odd angle. All this fuss over a ground loop? Talk about overthinking things. Zix 427 hovered nervously near the access hatch, his scales shifting between shades of worry and confusion. "Our diagnostics show no electrical grounding issues." "That's because your diagnostics are too smart for their own good," Jack's voice came back, accompanied by the sound of him shuffling around in the tight space. "They're looking for complex problems because that's what they're programmed to find. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one." He emerged from the service channel, his face streaked with some sort of luminescent coolant, but wearing a triumphant grin. "Your fancy quantum field is creating a feedback loop with the ship's basic electrical systems. It's like having two sets of musicians playing different songs in the same room. Sooner or later, everything goes out of whack." The human engineer walked over to his toolkit and pulled out what looked like a simple copper wire. The assembled alien engineers watched in mixed horror and fascination as he began stripping the insulation with his teeth. "But the quantum field is isolated from the ship's standard power grid," X-189 protested, her data pad frantically recording everything. "It's impossible for them to interact." "Nothing's impossible, especially when it comes to electricity finding a path it shouldn't," Jack said, now twisting the wire into an intricate pattern. "Your quantum field's so perfect, it's actually creating a sort of shadow current in the regular systems. All we need to do is give it a proper path to ground itself." He held up his creation, a simple coil of copper wire with several small crystal shards, which he borrowed from the ship's mess hall salt shakers, woven into its length. "This'll act as a bridge between the quantum and conventional fields. The crystals will help modulate the flow, keep everything in harmony." "That cannot possibly work," one of the Vultzer theorists declared, their crystalline form vibrating with indignation. "You're suggesting solving a quantum-level problem with primitive metallurgy." "Watch and learn," Jack winked, already climbing back into the service channel. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Now, nobody panic when I do this next part." Before anyone could stop him, he had connected his makeshift device between the drive's quantum matrix and the ship's standard power grid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the drive core's sickly yellow pulse began to shift, moving through the spectrum until it settled on a healthy blue-white glow. The warning lights that had been flashing for the past month went dark. The ever-present vibration in the deck plates smoothed out to a gentle hum. Throughout the ship, systems that had been acting erratically suddenly returned to normal operation. "Ladies, gentlemen, and various other forms of life," Jack announced, emerging from the service channel for the last time. "I give you a properly grounded FTL drive. Sometimes all the universe needs is a little help finding its way home." The engineering bay erupted in a chaos of reactions. The ship's AI was frantically trying to explain how an impossible solution was currently working. The Vultzer theorists had entered a state of deep meditation, attempting to reconcile their understanding of physics with what they'd just witnessed. Several junior engineers were already taking notes on Jack's methodology, their earlier horror replaced by intense curiosity. Zix 427 slithered forward, his scales now showing the deep green of amazement. How did you know this would work? Jack shrugged, already packing up his tools. Simple. Really. I just listened to what the ship was telling me. Sometimes, the fanciest machines have the simplest problems. Now, he grinned, pulling out a thermos. Who wants to learn about another human engineering tradition called the Victory Coffee? The emergency council chamber had a very different atmosphere now. The holographic representatives of the various species flickered with a mix of emotions ranging from embarrassment to fascination as they reviewed the technical logs of Jack Thompson's repair work. He fixed it with table salt and copper wire. Ambassador Vextor stated for the third time, his crystalline form still unable to process this reality. Our most advanced ship in the galaxy, and he fixed it with materials from the mess hall. Jack sat in the center of the chamber, boots propped up on a console that probably cost more than his entire ship, munching on something he called an emergency sandwich. Another human tradition that had the xenobiologists frantically taking notes. Sometimes the simple answer is the right answer, he said between bites. Your drive was like a concert piano that was too perfectly tuned. Had to introduce a little controlled chaos to get her singing right again. Zix 427, his scales now a thoughtful shade of blue-green, stepped forward. But our diagnostic systems should have detected a basic grounding issue. The quantum harmonics were working exactly as designed. Jack interrupted gently. That's the problem with super advanced technology sometimes. It can get too smart for its own good. Like looking for your glasses while you're wearing them. The human engineer stood up, brushing crumbs from his coveralls in a way that made several cleaning drones rush forward in excitement. Your systems were so busy looking for quantum-level problems, they'd missed the basic stuff. Sometimes you need to step back and look at the big picture. High Commissioner Tlexin raised her sensory appendages in what had become a universal sign of curiosity among the council members. Would you explain this engineering intuition you mentioned earlier? Our records show no such concept in our technical databases. Jack grinned, pulling out his well-worn multimeter. Can't really explain it. You have to feel it. Here, who wants to learn how to listen to a machine's heartbeat? To everyone's surprise, a line of alien engineers formed, each eager to try this strange human method. Even the Volxer theorists, their crystalline forms still vibrating with mild indignation, joined the crew. Notice how the vibration changes when you adjust the power flow, Jack explained to an entranced X-189, who had been recording every word he'd spoken since the repair. That's the ship talking to you. Every machine has its own voice. You just have to learn how to listen. In the corner, the ship's AI was having what could only be described as an existential crisis. It had run the calculations 1,000,000 times and still couldn't explain how the human solution worked so perfectly. The fact that Jack had named the drive Betty and occasionally patted it encouragingly only added to its confusion. We will need to update our engineering protocols, Zix 427 announced to the council. Perhaps there is merit in combining our advanced technology with more traditional methods. Just don't go overboard with it, Jack cautioned, now teaching a group of junior engineers how to use his rubber mallet. The secret is knowing when to use the fancy stuff and when to keep it simple. Speaking of which, he reached into his toolkit and pulled out several more copper wires. Who wants to learn about something we call preventive maintenance? The term sent the ship's computer into another spiral of confusion, but the engineers crowded forward eagerly. Even Ambassador Vextor found himself drifting closer, his crystalline structure resonating with reluctant interest. First rule of engineering, Jack said, his voice taking on the tone of a mentor passing down ancient wisdom. If it ain't broke, it doesn't have enough features yet. But sometimes, the best feature is just making sure the basic stuff works right. as he began explaining the concept of the engineering slap to his captivated audience. The Axiom Perpetual's drive hummed contentedly in the background, its blue-white glow stronger and steadier than it had ever been. 3 months after the FTL incident, the most prestigious engineering academy in the Galactic Core found itself hosting an unusual class. In a workshop that had been hastily converted from a quantum physics laboratory, Jack Thompson stood before a group of elite alien engineers, a rubber mallet in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Today's lesson, he announced to his rapt audience, is about something we humans call Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong, usually at the worst possible moment. And that's why we need to be ready for anything. The workshop looked more like a museum of ancient technology than a classroom. Analog multimeters sat next to quantum scanners. Simple hand tools were arranged beside holographic diagnostic arrays. And in the center of it all, a partially disassembled engine core waited for the day's lesson. Zix-427, now the chief advocate for what the council called integrated engineering methodologies, watched from the back of the room. His scales had taken on the deep blue of professional satisfaction as he observed the galaxy's finest minds learning to use a screwdriver. The problem with only using advanced technology, Jack continued, picking up a simple wrench, is that you forget the basics. It's like trying to perform surgery with power tools. Sometimes you need a gentle touch instead of raw power. A Vulxer student raised their crystalline appendage. But our computational methods are perfect. They account for every variable, except the ones they don't know about. Jack interrupted with a grin. Watch this. He approached the engine core and gave it a gentle tap with his wrench. The room's diagnostic systems immediately lit up with dozens of readings, but Jack wasn't looking at any of them. Instead, he was listening. Hear that? He asked. That's the sound of a misaligned power coupling. Your fancy sensors won't pick it up for another week, but by then, it'll be a much bigger problem. Sometimes, the best diagnostic tool is right here. He tapped his ear. The students crowded forward, each trying to hear what their human teacher had detected. Even the ship's AI, which had been monitoring the class out of what it called scientific curiosity, adjusted its sensors to focus on the sound. In another part of the galaxy, the mechanic monks of Ta Ceti were experiencing their own revolution. Their meditation chambers now included what they called practical enlightenment sessions, where they learned to combine their traditional understanding of machine spirits with human-style hands-on engineering. The universe speaks through many voices, the high mechanic intoned, holding up a battered multi-tool that had been blessed with sacred oils. Some through quantum harmonics, others through the sweet sound of a well-tuned engine. Back at the academy, Jack was demonstrating the fine art of percussive maintenance to a group of horrified but fascinated senior engineers. Sometimes, he explained, giving the engine core a carefully calculated whack with his rubber mallet, you just need to remind the machine who's boss. The engine's erratic fluctuations immediately stabilized, causing several students to drop their data pads in shock. The ship's AI actually went silent for a full minute, its processors struggling to update its understanding of engineering physics. But the most important lesson, Jack said, setting down his tools, is knowing when to use which method. Sometimes you need advanced quantum theory. Sometimes you need a good whack with a hammer. The true art is knowing the difference. As the class ended, Zix-427 noticed something remarkable. The students were no longer just taking notes. They were touching the equipment, listening to it, developing what humans called a feel for the machinery. The integration of human intuition with galactic technology was creating something entirely new. Perhaps, he mused to himself, his scales shifting to the rare gold color of profound understanding. This is how the next great revolution in engineering begins, not with a quantum leap, but with a well-placed tap from a rubber mallet. 6 months after the FTL incident, the Galactic Council's Engineering Standards Committee found itself voting on what had become known as the Thompson Protocols. The massive document, which had started as X-189's personal notes on Jack's methods, had evolved into a comprehensive guide to integrating human engineering practices with advanced galactic technology. The vote stands at unanimous in favor, High Commissioner Tlexin announced, her sensory appendages vibrating with barely contained excitement. From this day forward, all Galactic Council vessels will be required to maintain both traditional diagnostic systems and what humans call the personal touch. Meanwhile, in a small workshop on New Armstrong Colony, Jack Thompson was doing what he did best, fixing things. His latest project was a broken food synthesizer that a passing Vulture trade ship had brought in. The ship's captain had specifically requested him, having heard about the miracle worker of the Outer Rim. "You know what the funny thing is," Jack said to the synthesizer as he worked, a habit he'd never bothered to break. "Those fancy ships are now installing manual access panels and basic diagnostic ports, all because someone finally admitted that sometimes you need to get your hands dirty." The workshop's walls were now decorated with various alien certificates and honors, all of which Jack had stuffed into a corner until his assistant had insisted on displaying them. The most prominent was the newly created Thompson Medal for Practical Innovation, though Jack had yet to actually wear the thing. Too fancy for his taste. A holographic message flickered to life above his workbench. It was X-427, his scales the deep green of satisfaction. "The last batch of students has graduated from the practical engineering program," the alien engineer reported. "They're already being called Thompson's children by the old guard, though I must report that 3 quantum computers have filed formal protests about the use of percussion-based maintenance techniques." Jack chuckled, wiping his hands on his ever-present stained coveralls. "Tell them to loosen up a bit. A little tap now, and then never hurt anyone." He paused, then added with a grin, "Well, except for that one time with the gravity generator, but we fixed that too, didn't we?" Across the galaxy, ships were being retrofitted with what had become known as Thompson stations, special engineering sections that combined advanced diagnostic equipment with good old-fashioned manual tools. The sight of alien engineers using wrenches and listening to engine cores had become increasingly common. The mechanic monks of Tau Ceti had gone even further, declaring human engineering intuition a form of natural connection to the machine spirits. They'd started a yearly pilgrimage to New Armstrong, where they would spend a month learning the ancient human art of winging it. "The most remarkable thing," X-189 said in her latest research paper, "is not that human methods work, but that they've made our own technology work better. By stepping back from pure theory and adding a personal connection to our machines, we've advanced further than we ever could have with logic alone." Back in his workshop, Jack finally got the food synthesizer working again. The fix had required a paperclip, some copper wire, and what he called his lucky screwdriver. The Vulture captain watched in amazement as the machine not only started working, but began producing better-tasting food than before. "Sometimes," Jack explained, patting the machine affectionately, "they just need a little reminder that they're not just collections of parts. They're more like partners. Treat 'em right, listen to what they're telling you, and they'll never let you down." As he finished speaking, the synthesizer produced a perfect cup of coffee, something it hadn't been programmed to do, but somehow now could. The ship's eye, which had been observing the repair, added another entry to its growing file of unexplainable human engineering successes. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the Axiom Perpetual continued its journey, its drive core humming the sweet song of perfect harmony between human intuition and alien technology, a living testament to the day when humanity showed the galaxy that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution of all.